Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy that I see so many of you here at this lecture series, which is called November Talks. November Talks is called because it takes place in November, as you might understand. And it's a lecture series that was started with our Dean Emeritus Zdeněk Zavřel, who started this tradition of these lectures that are happening in November, and since that time it became a part of our life here on our faculty. For second year now, we have a new curator, which is Mirek Pazdera, who is organizing the lecture series. I'm very happy that he took this complicated task. This year, the topic is materials, and I'll give the word to Mirek to give you an introduction. Thank you.
Ahoy. Good evening, everybody. I have now this nice pleasure and opportunity to welcome our dear guest, Gilles Delalex from the studio Muoto. This is our first evening of this November Talks lecture series for this year. And the next week we will have here material cultures from London, and in 2 weeks Gilles and Martin from the studio Rotor and Halfwerk from Brussels. And the last lecture will be about the reuse in construction by Guido Brandi, who is an architect and editor from Zurich. And today we have here Gilles, and he started his practice Muoto in 2003 in Paris, together with his colleague Yves Moreau, and they are, for me, one of the most interesting architecture offices currently now in Europe. And the first project I saw you did was the public condenser built in Paris as a part of the larger faculty campus on the outskirts of Paris, which is probably the also really like a groundbreaking project for you, with specific aesthetical qualities and radical simplicity in its appearance. And today, and on this evening, we will speak, or you will speak, about the highways as a radical public space or a piece of infrastructure. And yes, thank you. Enjoy the lecture, and I'm really happy that we have you here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and the office to present our work. But this is our first lecture in Prague, and we're as you know, we're coming quite often now. So it's nice to have this specific opportunity to present a little bit more than well, to present the work as a whole. I understood that the theme is materiality of or matter. The way I suggest to deal with it is not to go really too into materiality itself, but to maybe the corpus, the general imaginary within which we sort of extract material. So, I mean, maybe compared to the other lectures, I will maybe more on a raise more an imaginary perspective, and I have like plenty of images to show you to maybe give you an idea of what an imaginary means. Imaginaire, we would say in French. The word is not as used in English, I would say, but it's like a package of images that serve, you know, that are useful to create project, how they, whatever they are. This kind of imaginary, we sort of published it last year in a book called Holy Highway, and I basically will try to, this is the book, and we will try, which is a collection of text and images. It's a bit of like a catalog of things you don't show usually in normal publications, and we thought it'd be nice to, if an office would show its own kitchen, you know, the way it makes the project, you know, in a very private way, it'd be nice. So we thought, let's bring together what we don't show usually, the text we've published in different circumstances, and the image we usually pin on the wall, just for us. Let's put it all together and do that book, and you know, that will be the 20 years of the office. So I will try to first make a first talk about how we came, how did we got interested in this figure of the motorway and the figure of the infrastructure more globally. Then we'll go through the books and what it means and how we relate it to the projects that we actually do in the office. So you have very old projects and fairly recent ones all mixed together. So you'll see plenty of things. So this is, let's start with one of the, first building. First building we did, it's a gas post. It's a tiny technical object that is the visible part of the public gas infrastructure in France, and we had to design 2 of them. So we're so excited. These were our first, we're like super young guys. So we imagined this one somewhere. Usually they take the form of a concrete block with graffitis on them. You don't even notice them, but there are thousands of them everywhere around Paris. So we imagined that we would make like a tent, metal tent like, and we would grow ivy on it, and it would turn into a big bush, sort of a little modern ruin. And pretty much at the same time, there's a private client came to us because they noticed that we were interested in technical objects, and said, why don't you do a data center, a model of a data center that can be anywhere in the south of France. So we had no idea, no context, so we designed that that data center, you know, because this was the year when Tron #2 came out, the movie. So we used that grid, which is also the grid of the car park, to define the whole structure and the facade itself. So you could, you know, make that super generic object anywhere. So the client didn't like it at all. So we used sort of this idea somewhere else for an office building in the outskirts of Paris. It's a public project, a small office building. And there we used that idea of trying to bring all together car park, structure, windows, you know, to get to the most abstract form possible by, you know, working on the dimensions of construction of everything. This is a play on you know, on the act of construction. So we worked on this building, which is ideally, you know, this hyper abstract black and white box. But since the ground was not flat, we made this little stair-like cut at the bottom, and basically this super generic box that reflects the landscape around takes its specificity only from the way it sits on the ground. Even the trees sometimes they seem to align. You see the trees want to align with the frame of the building. So if you these are just a very, very early project that we did, where we were young architects, and I think we had already, with only 2 projects, we already reached a point where we were in between the grid, the modern grid, the rehabilitating kind of modern vocabulary on one side, on this left side for you, and the rune, the ivy growing onto the structure, and working on that tension between runes, the runes of modernity, and the idea to revive this modern tradition in architecture. You have to think it was 20 years ago. So we thought the tension between the two was interesting, and we thought it hadn't been that much worked out from architects. It was quite present in movies, in fiction, but not so much in architecture. But this took us pretty much to the field of the infrastructure, on the infrastructure being both, the big bridges and the roadsides with the, with little grass growing from the cracks in the concrete, So this is basically the imaginary that the book brings together with bits of infrastructures that we took. This one was from our trips usually. This one was taken in Montreal. This one was in Medellin. This is Medellin again. This is next to my home in Paris. This is in Shenzhen, Boston, India. This is a project. So I think this whole vocabulary came, I think, gradually into the design, even though the two works, the research on the infrastructure and the design were quite separate parts, and it took years for us to give to ourselves this capacity to bring together a more academic research and the design work of the office. Another reason I think this focus on the modern infrastructure came to the office gradually in time is because we have faced that situation at the beginning many times, several times, to get to a place where the context is almost non-existent, and this is in Normandy. You could say it could be anywhere on Earth, and within, look, this is the place where we had to put the building. This was a competition for a technopole, like, a public building for offices, and this happened a few times, and there we had to find a solution to create a building that would not respond to a context but create its own context. And that's a difficult thing, because in architecture we're not used to that. That's not the way projects are taught. And we had basically two strategies. One, this is a building I will come back on to in Laval. It's a competition we won, which is to recreate a world that contains itself, basically the city. And another one, this one I will come back on it as well. This is the Saint-Lô, just the pictures I've showed you just before. It's the idea of thinking of the building as a beginning. Not as an end, as something that is supposed to be finished, but something that starts something that is yet to be. So, two different strategies depending a bit on the size of the project themselves. So I was saying, we're not used to this situation where there's no context. Because I think there's a tradition in architecture which we can call the learning from tradition. It's a tradition to go to a site, you know, professors, they tell you, look at the site, look at the details, feel the site, you know, the genius loci, and you will get the sense of an architecture from there. This is learning from Las Vegas, but you know, a lot of our understanding of architecture is about going to a place and trying to get as much information as possible in order to imagine, to create an architecture that responds to these very specific local conditions. Las Vegas for us is a monument of architecture. This is one of the most important projects. It's a book, huh? But it's also, it's so influential, it's so important, and what, you know, I'm not gonna make a course on Venturi, but I hope you read it. What Venturi says basically is that there's a vernacular that belongs to the United States. There's a city that exists that does not a reproduction of the European historical city. That's one thing. And he says also, the city comes from the road, which can be said from, you know, in European cities as well. City comes from a way in and a way out, from its condition of being linked to a surrounding environment. And I think there's another thing he says, well, among the many things he says in this book, that city comes from repetition. That is, the city, the city is both the creation of the repetition of buildings, one after that get built one after the other, but it's also the opposite that happens. The city creates an architecture of its own. You know, this Las Vegas has its own architecture. So there's a dialectic between the architecture and the city. One creates the other, and you don't know exactly which one is the origin of which. You know, is it the chicken or the egg that comes first? I think somehow Venturi, Scott Brown, Isnour raised that one question. It's interesting enough, if you look at this series of black and white photos, they are actually quite inspired by Ed Rocher's book that he did 10 years before. It was in 62, I think, yeah, 62, and Las Vegas was 72. And Ed Rocher had pretty done this initial work of taking photos of gas stations on a way he was doing regularly to go to meet his mother. And the book is usually considered as the first art piece being a book. Not a book showing art pieces, but the book itself is art. And so the book contains exactly what the title suggests. It contains 26 gasoline stations, and they're all taken in a very neutral way. And Ed Rocher just says where it is, the name of the station, and where it is. And you know, he's taken also this this one picture and turned it into a drawing and a painting, and he started another series. And then, as he was doing the series would stop, and then he would start them later on. And then he would do another book on apartments, this time in Los Angeles, and then he would start another series, meaning that every work, everything he would do would only come as a series. And I think probably this what influenced learning from Las Vegas. I think learning from Las Vegas comes very much from Rocher's work on this generic landscape. What is interesting also, maybe because he's just an artist, he has this capacity to maybe go even further than, artists can go a little bit further than we can as architects. He did that series on the stadium, and they were taken from, they are bird eye views, photographs, and he said, well, I didn't even take these pictures myself, because the subject is more important than the way it's taken. He said, it doesn't matter. What is important is the subject of the series, is what you repeat. And so I think, once again, what he, of course, Rocher says there's nothing to learn from my book, because he's not an architect. But I think he says something about the power of repetition and how repetition creates singularity. Usually you oppose, you say the general idea is that repetition creates the same. But what Rocher says, and what has been said by Deleuze in Difference and Repetition, is both, I think, authors say singularity comes from repetition. There's nothing singular if it's not repeated. And Deleuze, for instance, takes the example of the festival. He said, look at the festival. It repeats itself, like a series of conferences. It repeats itself, and the more it repeats itself, the more it becomes itself. Repetition creates a specificity. Specificity comes from repetition. So that's my thesis I did at the beginning of where we started working together with Yves. I was still pretty much on the process of finishing my doctorate thesis, and the work was actually a travel, pretty much inspired by Ed Rocher, but this time in Europe, much smaller territory, but a lot more countries and differences between borders. So basically, the idea was slightly, it was quite different from Rocher's approach. The idea was to focus on little elements that would repeat themselves from station to station, and show that the more you stay on the motorway, the more you see a difference between things that repeat themselves. And therefore, it means that standardization, again, does not create sameness, but also creates differences that you tend to perceive as you stay within the series. If you look at canopies, you can hardly find one that is exactly the same as the other. And that's a strange phenomena, because we sort of think of this global force that would turn every place the same as the other. But what you see is that there's a global, a company like FINA or ELF or JET, SO would all love to turn the entire network in their image. But what happens is that never happens. Meaning that, we're coming back, I don't know how I'm going to relate to what I was saying at the beginning, meaning that if things look the same, it's not because there's a general force that homogenizes the world. It's because there's an idea, we have inside of us a kind of ideology that tend to make us do the same. And that's why when you if you think of the learning from tradition, if you think of it, we all work on specific places, and yet if you go from the south to the north, to the east, to the west of Europe, you find the same buildings. So how come? If we study science, if we take into account localities, why do we make the same buildings everywhere? It's because there's a force which is inside our head that we call ideology. So we thought, I think this ideology, you don't escape our ideology, but you may, if you don't want to be just just follow the trends. The only chance you have is to create your own world, is create your own spectrum of images. So that's pretty much why I'm showing you all these images. Then after this trip along motorways, I was asked to write a little story, a short story, which is more about the social aspect of gas stations. It's called Ventolin Inc. Because Ventolin the story is that Ventolin had bought all the gas stations to sell illegal products. That's partly true, you know. Gas stations are interesting places because there's so many illegal things happening there, and that's why they are so important. So that story is itself inspired by a short novel by Gilles Delalex that is called Concrete Island. I don't know if I'm going to get, no, it's later. So in Gilles Delalex's Concrete Islands, you have the story of this architect who's called Robert Maitland. And Robert Maitland is a really famous architect in London, and he drives his Jaguar. He goes through a tunnel, and then as he comes out of the tunnel, there's a ray of sun that blinds him and turns into the hole of an interchange, and got stuck. He's hurt, and there's a small community that takes care of him, and he's being rescued, and he's trying during the whole story to escape. You know, he's trying to escape from this island. He's a prisoner, and one day he manages to escape, and he realizes that he could have escaped from the very first minute he had fell into the interchange. And so he realizes that he was unconsciously trapped because he didn't want to return to his normal life with his mistress, his wife, his kids, his job. He didn't want to live with that. So in this story, actually, Robert Maitland stays on the motorway and tend to love his transient life so much that he really decides to stay on the motorway and never go home, because the motorway has become his new home. That's the story. So 20 years later, that's the full story before the book. 20 years later, we decided to come back on this theme of the motorway, but from the point of view of the project that we had done and the studies that we had done in between with the office. And we gathered pictures from everywhere, you know, from our mobile phones or 3Ds, trips, little models. We sort of brought everything and arranged them in a quite analog way, I would say. Strangely, some conceptual model looked like building we've seen somewhere. So it was a strange rearrangement of images and little conceptual models that made it like a, you know, a kind of catalog. Like, you should buy the book. So we did the same with the text. Basically, it's a collage of texts that are not easy to read because it's just glued to each other, but they sort of come together as a matter, as a material, let's say, both image material, text material, that sort of put together both the reference and the interpretation, the architectural interpretations. So you don't always know which, if it's a reference or if it's a project, really. So in order to classify that, in order to arrange that, we try to separate, to make a structure that you can hardly see within the book, but that exists as a background. It's a structure that's defined by 4 figures that we thought could help us arrange both the text and images, but it was mostly useful for the text. And these 4 figures are sort of types or aesthetic, I don't know how to say in English, registries, you know, like little world within the big world. And you have 4 figures that can be thought as types, as building types. One is a totem, one is the totems, second one is the runes, we call them joyful runes. Third one is concrete islands, which is a reference to J.G. Ballard's novel. And the last one is the phantom crowd, actually the empty car park. And well, so from now on, I'll show you how we relate this book to our own project, to the way we've considered our own projects. So totems for us are all the verticalities of the motorway. Buildings, they are the most Venturian structures, like antennas or canopies, you know, those kind of things that have to stand straight. May look like a bit like a platform as well. This is a series by Eric Tabouchi, who makes reference to Ed Rocher. You know, little making reference, you know, to each other. But the difference is that these are all gas stations that have been reused for, you know, to be turned into a different things. Pizza place, shops. We did our survey before Eric Tabouchi. We didn't copy him, but you see that there's a generation, there's a whole, you know, genealogy of work on motorways and repetition. So an example of a totem or a sort of a billboard building, sometimes we call them like this. We call them billboard building when they have to be high. They have to elevate themselves because of the situation. It's the one we did. I told you we did in Normandy. We had this idea of Stephen Hall's early projects, which were called The Edge of a City, pretty much inspired by Sol LeWitt. You know, that were marking the end of a city. You used to make it visible by, you know, being very thin and defining a large volume, mostly by the edges. So these are buildings that have little that are basically skeletons, just structure. So the idea was to make that building pretty much like orthogonal system with the 3 axes, and we said, well, the new site, which is not there, will start from, no, we give the point of departure, creates levels with all the offices and the auditorium pretty much in the middle. So it has also a little urban it does create a sort of little urban condition. Within this same category, we have this. We had a part of our references this really strange structure. If you, I mean, this is very known in England. When I showed it once in England, everybody knew it because it was in the newspaper. This is a military platform on the channel. and I was built for the Second World War in order to fight the German B1. And it did the platform did its job during World War II. There were a whole series of them, and half of them were in concrete, and the other one was in metal. The metal ones were quite interesting. They looked like spiders, very interesting objects. But we chose to focus on this one because the way it was built was quite interesting. It was built as a boat, then brought onto the channel. They would find a sand bank, I don't know how you call it, and then you would sink the platform, and then only the two column and the platform would remain. But at the end of the war, Major Bates, who was an ex-military guy, he noticed that this platform had been built outside of England. They were in international waters. So he decided to appropriate one of them and to define it as his own kingdom. So he became the king, and his wife became the queen, and the son, a prince. And he created what we call a micronation, which is a private nation, with its own money, the passports. You can still, I think you could still buy passport, and the flag and everything. So he created a new country, basically. And the England was warned that there was this new country, and they sent boats in order to attack them. This was also counterattacked by the Prime Minister. I mean, there's been so many stories about this platform, and I think we thought that the strange shape of this building was pretty much related to the to its own history that was so crazy. And nothing would have happened if it had been like a normal platform, because of the big column, because you can see it's difficult to reach. And how come England was so scared of this little platform with just a radio on it with nothing? Why did they send military boats? They couldn't do anything. They wouldn't kill each other for nothing. And we thought the architecture of this platform certainly played a role, and in the fact that it became something from a public infrastructure protecting the country from another one, to a private country threatening its initial nation. So we took pretty much, I think we borrowed more or less, was little conscious of it. I mean, I don't know, during preparing this conference, we thought we had used a bit the vocabulary of this platform for a tower which construction is starting now in Belgium. This is actually the entrance of a new district where you have laboratories. There's a campus. There's a new car park, and maybe one day a third building. So I won't go too deep into that other project, but I just wanted to show you sort of the transformation of a reference into a structural project. Here we use the technical cores, put them outside in order to hold free floors. This in Flanders. Okay, second category is, we call them joyful ruins. They're not actually right on the motorway, but mostly on the side. For us, these ruins, they correspond to structures that you see a lot along the roads. This is along Japanese roads. They're particularly beautiful in Japan. They are structures that hold the rocks from falling down onto the road. And today we found this book by Toshio Shibata, the photographer. We thought, oh wow, this is exactly the architecture we want to do. And Shibata has a fascination on these structures. We think are beautiful because they are at once very brutal. I mean, they really belong to the road. I mean, they are the extension of the road. But if you look at the details, look, they're so precise. The technicity of these structures are quite powerful and beautiful. And we thought there was another thing that was fascinating in these structures. I don't know if you remember the picture of the grid and the ivy, you know, the rune and the grid. And probably these structures have this same ambiguity. You don't know whether they are modern grids. You don't know if they are growing onto the mountain. You can imagine that, you know, like on this one, that they're going to cover the whole mountain. At a certain point, civilization will go that far that there won't be any wild place anymore. But maybe they are in a state of regress. You don't know if they are in a state of progress or in a state of regress. Are they ruins or are they means of conquest? You know, and that's the whole thing of modernity, the whole question of modernity today, you know, between the old dream of conquest of the world and the sort of state of ruin that we, you know, in which we find it today. So we use that reference actually also a little bit by accident. We were doing a chapel in Flanders, in a really pretty park with a river, and we thought, yeah, let's do a grotto, you know, like a little rock-like romantic little chapel, and yeah, like a romantic sculpture. So we played a little bit, and but this wasn't really working structurally. So we thought, we took the picture by Toshio Shibata, and we thought, like, yeah, and we took it as a structure that we would turn inside out. Basically, we thought, okay, let's put the structure outside and then use that structure in order to hold the grass that will grow on the building, and rainwater will go down and back to the river. So basically, this idea was pretty much to recreate sort of a mountain, which is also a figure that is a recurring figure in all religious texts. Basically, the mountain being another recurring figure in the office. Third figure is we called it Concrete Island. In reference to Ballard, you know, to the whole of this interchange within which the architect Robert Maitland was a sort of prisoner. Concrete islands for this is the cover of the book. We're looking for a very specific one. There's a place over outside London, which may be the place where the novel took place. Nobody's really sure, but we have that very interesting interchange in Paris. We call it l'échangeur de Bagnolet. Bagnolet is the city that is just outside the ring road of Paris. It's part of what we call the Red Belt, the communist belt, because all the cities along the ring road were communist cities. And this interchange was actually conceived by an architect who conceived it really as a monument to the people. So think of the times. This was a monument to communist monument to the people, and it has a long history because it's very complex. And initially, it was supposed to host in the middle a place for the people, a cultural place. Sorry. It's very known because of this drop of water-like shape. And there was this one competition that was a Jean Nouvel building he did in, I think, the 80s for a rock concert place, which he won actually, but wasn't built. And what was built instead was pretty much that. It was a commercial center with a huge car park. And today, most of it is, a lot of it is not used actually. Some branches, some roads are used for the trailers, for car parks, to park the trucks at night, and part of it is not used anymore. So it has become sort of a strange ruin, quite enormous, with a commercial center that is not much used. So it has this very pre-apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic atmosphere that is proper to J.G. Ballard's landscape and novels. So these concrete islands types of project for us, they correspond to very horizontal worlds. You know, they world on their own. They're very utopian projects where you have everything basically. This is the project we did for Laval. And, you know, see the context pretty much along a ring road also. And the big idea of the project was that the city had a stadium, wanted to build a stadium just up north in the site. And we suggested to bring the stadium all together with the program, which was a city of virtual reality, a place with, you know, schools, you know, to learn 3D simulation. There was a company, there were several facilities for 3D activity, and we create this kind of chip-like plan. Looks like the Death Star, except it's white in Star Wars, or like a pizza. Or we said this is the center of the city. This is the size of a district because the diameter is 100 meter. That's how we defend it. You know, define the limit of the city, and within this limit, draw a building. So actually the mayor did like the idea because he said, well, we won't put the stadium, don't worry, we're not going to give you another project like a stadium like this, but it's interesting to have a project that is built on with only half of it. We thought it's nice to have imagine that you have a project, you only build half, and the other half, well, we look for investors, we look for companies, we want to attract companies, they'll be so happy to be next to the infrastructure. And well, of course, we never thought of that, but that's how we won the project. So imagine that pretty much like a labyrinth of streets, you know, crisscrossing that big circle. The project was abandoned once because the mayor changed. You know, the new mayor didn't like 3D. He liked bicycles more. He did a bicycle place instead. So we didn't build it, but somehow I think we did build this one last year, which is in Montpellier, and this is okay. This is not the same project, but I think it belongs to the same category, the same types, because it's very horizontal and also comes in a site when there's not much yet. Typical, you know, typical of this district, next to the high-speed train. There's the train station that is next door. The site hasn't been developed much. There should be plenty of office buildings around. And this is pretty much the first stone. That's how we call the first, in French we say première pierre, early stone. You know, the stone you put first in order to start. So, we suggested to make a very flat building again, with spacios and atriums. And you know, usually office buildings are 18, 19 meters wide, and a third of it is in the dark in the middle. And they're the most boring building ever. And 90% of office buildings are done this way. This one model in the world, basically. Huh? So we thought, let's try to find another typology where, you know, a place that encourages a little bit more interaction. So you have views between floors, and this is a building that is actually now hosting young companies in the field of high tech. I mean, there's lots of high tech programs in this selection, I have to admit. So we imagined that grid. It's about 12 by 12 meters. So every place within this grid can be lit naturally, and it can be reproduced indefinitely. This is an idea. This is a representation of during the competition and a study model. So you see the alternation of technical core, patio, and free plan, but a small free plan, and that's the result. Basically, you have one east-west axis that goes across the building that we define pretty much as a street, as an event space, and the ground floor is filled with public activities, and the upper floors are dedicated to office space. And we chose to make like a non-facade, make like a concrete block that would come first, and wait for the higher buildings to come. So that's why also we gave special attention to the roof. Last category. So we're getting closer to the end of this this talk. Phantom crowd. It's actually the series of pictures comes from a series of pictures by Alex McLean. You see, Alex McLean has a smaller airplane. It takes pictures from a slightly lower point of view, like 45 degrees. So not exactly like those from Ed Rocher. So it has a different, quite interesting view on the landscape. He's taken lots of empty car parks. So empty car parks for us are quite interesting because they say also something about the motorway as a public space. This very strange public space is also is public in a quite metaphysical point of view, because I mean, one thing we can say about car parks is they either exist too small or too big. You know, it's either it's empty or it's full of cars, and there's something quite interesting, even though they're empty, because you see the traces of people who came before, and you can feel the crowd somehow. That is somehow here, but as a phantom, you know, as a only through the traces. Another. We were teaching in Boston 2 years ago, and another interesting building we'd seen many years ago that's another car park, but this one is it's superimposed, and it's a really interesting building. I think it was designed in the 50s and had different renovation stages, and it's a market, a Chinese market on the ground floor. Then you have three layers of car park, and you have this crown, you know, the top floor dedicated to office space. So it's a strange, it's a pre-OMA building that has resisted time in a quite amazing way, and yeah, I remember I visited that one in the 90s, and pretty much, well, you see where I'm getting at. This is pretty much a building that resembles the Saclay building, which is sort of our little manifesto, I would say, the one building that goes maybe the further in its public essence, I would say. So this building for Saclay, well, you know, we made categories, but this one could belong to many of these 4 categories. It's a bit of a totem because it's quite vertical, and it's a bit of a it's a car. It looks really much like a car park. Has the structure of a car park. It's a bit of a ruin because it looks like it's not finished. A few parts of it are not used. You know, we convinced our client, for instance. You see that part underneath the big restaurant. We say, we don't need it yet. We don't have much money, so let's wait for later. So we thought it was like a bit like a wasteland, you know, a place that hasn't found its use yet, which is in a state of becoming. And basically, it's also a first stone. This foundation building, since there was almost nothing there, there was almost no context. So the building has to be its own public space. So the idea basically here was to create a vertical space, like a vertical car park, that would be crossed by a staircase. We said it was like a vertical street, and so that students, we've been specialized on campuses somehow, students, researchers, and employees will go from the place downstairs up to the roof, where you have 2 basketball courts. So basically, the idea was to create a series of open spaces, but made quite complex because of this hole that sort of relate them to each other. Basically, the idea was that the building could be open as long as possible. I mean, ideally 24 hours a day. It's not exactly the case, but the idea that you would bring together many activities, such as a collective restaurant, a cafeteria, sport rooms, inside, on the upper floor, and basketball courts, and all the logistics has come together. It's a very technical building. So the idea was to bring a large amount of activities, but while leaving each activity have its own life, so that you don't have, the idea came, we got the idea of this organization the moment we realized we don't need an entrance hall. There was an entrance hall, and the moment we thought, who needs an entrance hall? Every place can be accessible independently. And from that moment, structure became possible. And I think probably that was the only one that we could actually, that worked with this complex programming. This is the staircase, which we often compare to a Klein bottle. It's inside, but it's outside at the same time. You get into the building, but you remain outside, since it really rains inside. See, for instance, you're outside here, and you get up onto the roof of the building. That's the last picture, and you see that was our argument. This building would be pretty much like a gas station. It would create sort of a city before the city arrives, therefore not through density, but through the fact that it remains open 24 a day, like a 7-Eleven, really pretty much like a shop that is open all day, all night, and that's why people gather there. And I think it's over. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you for the lecture. I think we have now a little bit time for questions. If there are any questions in the public, I think we have now time. I will start probably.
Use me now.
I'm not really prepared, but I will try. It was for me interesting in the sense as you presented the picture. A lot of these pictures was kind of like kept from the bird's eye perspective, or I don't know. This like a kind of distance. So the point of view of the objects also for your architecture is probably quite important for you. I understand it so, and this is also probably connected with this modern optimism, which is visible in your work, also with the references to the 70s and 60s. Is it somehow this thing is something which is now topic in Paris, or do you see this tendency somehow in your like between your colleagues and also from the other offices? Because we all know the offices like Bruder and Baukunst and the others. Is there like role model for this, or how did you find your way to this modernistic like optimism, or I don't know? Maybe
I cannot talk for the others, I would say. I tried, well, I don't know, I tried to show how the story was. This is quite a personal story, I had to say. From the inside we see each other as quite different. From the outside there's clearly like a French scene, also related to Belgium. What did it happen? I think there's also a spirit of the times. There's a moment. I think we are exactly from the same generation, and probably we were reacting to something. I talked about that very known Belgium team office, and suddenly we were coming. There's a generation thing. We were probably coming from a moment, and we had to react towards an architecture that had become pretty, I would say, I don't know. I would say the moment, we were in a post-OMA moment where probably you see, for instance, big, the office. That was the hot thing, I would say, at the time, which was architecture was very diagrammatic. You would say, cross, loop, up, and then the building looks like a cross or like a loop. Construction doesn't matter. And also, architecture had become pretty much a sign without the subtlety of Van Scott Brown, without the fact that this is not as clear as it seems at first sight. And I think we were sort of reacting to this kind of architecture by looking for something more straightforward, something with no need for explanation. It's strange that I'm talking about my job, but I think we did try to do buildings that would express their publicness, their this concrete island drawing. just as simply as that, without need to. We didn't want to make buildings that were holding a discourse. That would be saying, I am so and so, or I do represent that state or that. You know, I think we were trying to get back to some essentials of, I don't know, modern comfort, efficiency, poetry, you know, something more crude, I would say. And probably, I would say probably we were in that's a generation thing, you know, and it took time to happen. We were discussing, we had that discussion with Brunter, and we were like, how did it happen? We didn't know each other. Our first building took 8 years to get built. You know, we had the white, I didn't show this one, but first one, they had the social and sports center. They started parallel to each other, but probably we were reacting. Well, our generation react to the previous one and said, the old stupid bastards were much better. That's how generation get created. And yeah, well, I couldn't go on and on about the conditions, huh? The feeling of crisis, how, you know, how architecture moved from, you know, the Netherlands, then to Spain, Switzerland, Belgium, France. I give just a generation. We're also a product of, we're trying to escape fashions and trends and everything, but we can help being a product of the times. Huh?
Yeah, I was curious if was it like if it came from academia or if it came more from practice and competitions. Yeah, but
in France, we were born from competition, from the public system in France. That is sort of changing at the moment, but I guess yeah, that did help. There's also the European competition. This is the first one we did with Yves. We won it, so that's how the office started. But the public system of competitions for young offices was really what made the office exist. That doesn't explain why we did what we did, huh? But I would say that's. But I wouldn't make the generation. The fact that this whole system is falling down, like the whole public system at the moment, won't help for the next generation, that's for sure. Which is too bad. But I couldn't tell. I think I think that we have lived in a moment. We still live in a moment of crisis, you know, of change of values, and probably each of us try to deal with it in its own way. You know, I think the architect just before us was trying. They were much more optimistic than we were. We have a little dark part, but it's always like this, you know. And there was some dark and. Is it utopian or dystopian? It's hard to say, I would say, you know. It's like in Balladian narratives.
And do we have any other questions from the public?
Hey, thank you for the lecture. I have sort of a follow-up question to Mira, and I wanted to ask what is your opinion on contemporary French architecture or French scene? Is there any French architecture, actually? Or do you think about these questions, and how is that related to maybe historic French architecture? Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, is there any French architecture?
Yeah. And what is your opinion?
My opinion?
Or maybe is it even important to think about whether there is a French architecture or whether there is a...
Really, you see it better than I do, I think. I think you see it from the outside. I mean, this French scene, we discovered it, you know, during conferences like here. We had no conscious of a scene itself. I think there's no theory about it. There's no leader. So I would say there's a phenomena, but I have no idea how it came about. Usually, I mean, in the Netherlands, there was a very public program that helped, you know, Dutch architecture exist. You know, there was the VNext program. There was something. It didn't come for no reason. In France, I got no idea why. But if you can tell me, I'd be happy to understand the context.
But you know, we all know these magazines, I don't know, like Arc Plus, they published the issue about the French, like current French architecture discourse 2 years ago or something like this. So maybe this is this kind of thing which is more, it's, yeah, as you said, like the perspective from outside. We can see it maybe clearer, or maybe like somehow also we simplify the situation somehow, which help us to like understand what's going on. Like it's like with the Belgium, or I don't know, like with Switzerland architecture.
But in Belgium, there was they created a Baumeister, which also, you know, made public competition accessible to interesting offices again. So there was a program, and there was an in France, which I think is a bit different. But I've got no idea what there's such a phenomena. There was, I don't know, influences. Maybe not, I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I'd like to know. I would be happy to have a clear answer. But we're not that many anyway, no?
I like the way you show the billboards, and you call them, or all these structures, and you call them totems. And I just wanted to know, what do you think about this idea that in fact we're sort of trying to take down these totems as much as possible, because we consider that they are destroying the landscape and they're just invasive. But if you call them totems, maybe we should behave differently to them.
Well, we actually, in the title of the book's called Holy Highway. So there's a suggestion. We do suggest that modernity has taken a new meaning today, which is more of a spiritual meaning, because there are remains, because there are ruins, because the spirit maybe remains, but modernity is dead, but still there. So our job is pretty much to revive it, you know. So it has some religious undertones. So totems for us was pretty a way of, well, we chose these figures because they had some spiritual, religious undertones. The totems are, you know, the vertical architectures are usually cosmic architectures, like the mountain. Why is the mountain always present in religious architecture? Because it's the link between the sky, the cosmos, heaven, and the normal world. No, you know. And I guess totems have this quite spiritual meaning. We're thinking of totems as also this these sticks. How do you call them? Gnomons. The gnomon is a stick. When you come into a new land, you put a stick. That's the first architecture, and you know, cast the shadow of the sun on the ground. And I think that's what the most primitive architecture ever. But that's the strong. It's really strong, huh? But as whether we have to keep them or not, I don't know. When they're in a state of ruin, yes, I would say. New ones are less interesting, probably. But they're part of the landscape. Huh? I think they sort of usually melt. You don't always. I mean, if you think of them as part of the experience of the motorway, they are interesting at night. For instance, it's the lighting system. Huh? They represent the lighting system. It sort of create sort of a quite. I don't know how to say, an experience where you sort of lose conscious, you know, you miss the exit, and go, oh God. So I think there's a strong physical experience that you, from this different verticality, this vertical architecture on the motorway. Each of these figures, I mean, in the book we sort of describe them a little bit more precisely in terms of what they do create when we drive down the motorway.
Hi, from here. What is your relationship with the grid today? Because with the grid. Because most of the project starts with the grid, and but yet you tend to destroy the grid in the process, and yeah, you're inviting it and destroying it at the same time as creating it. So I'm asking, like,
this is going to be a new subject of research. I mean, the grid has many different meanings. There is a religious meaning, for instance, in the grid. If you think of the grid in abstract visual art, usually Mondrian or Reinhardt, they all have a sort of a explanation, a spiritual explanation for the grid. You can have a very functional explanation for the grid. You know, it refers to functionalism in architecture, but functionalism has so many expressions of functionalism in architecture. In France, the grid is also a sort of a symbol of the Republic. I don't have, there's a super interesting map that we found of France after the revolution, when it was, and you see France cut into squares, and relates pretty much to the Jefferson grid. On the first, for instance, on the database, if you think of Tron, in Tron, the movie, Jeff Bridges, I think it's funny because Jeff has the same name as Jefferson. So it has, and he explains that the grid is the ultimate frontier. So it means the frontier, if you think, I think, that's my interpretation, but I think the digital world in Tron is actually a metaphor of the expansion of the United States, of the new world. Because the frontier is the limit between the world that has been conquered and the world that is still barbaric, still wild, the Indians, you know? That's the frontier. That's the, you know, Westerns. So there's this myth. And I think the Tron, the movie, was, you know, saying this grid, the Jefferson grid, is actually the means of the conquest of the wild territories. So it has also a sort of a political meaning. And in France, if you think of it, it's we live in a very republican system, where the idea is to flatten differences. Equality is the initial condition for freedom. So in France, the grid is also like a strong political figure. We made an installation about that. It refers to super studio. I'll make a paper on that, I think, because there are many ways to relate. Rosalind Krauss, for instance, she refers to the grid in visual arts. She says it's, I don't know, painting from, I don't know, 17th or 18th century. You know, she takes in his very famous essay, she has this painting of a window with the small wood, the small cut, and she says, look, that's the first time the grid appears in visual arts, and it's a window that, you know, frames the landscape. That's the first emergence of the grid. Why we use it, you know, I don't know. I would say maybe it relates to the fact that we have these horizontal projects, you know, the flat ones, when you have to start somewhere for no reason. I mean, you have a tendency to lay down a grid. That's the plan of the grid, like the Roman city, and you say, this is the frame. Let's start. This is the blueprint. Let's start from here. So I think there's an attitude that we've had many times to start from nothing, and maybe the first gesture, the first move you make, is to define the frame within which life will unfold, I would say.
So, last question or dinner? Okay, last question.
Easy questions, huh?
Thank you. You hear me? Okay. Thank you for the lecture. I very much like the way you work with the references and with the sources of inspiration, how you turn them into a sort of research. But now I'm interested more in the reception of your work. And now I don't mean clients, but maybe criticism in France or wider audience. So my question will be, what's the worst thing anyone you heard about your projects?
The worst thing I've heard about?
Yes.
Criticism, too much concrete. It's always about ecology, basically. We pretty much not appreciate it from that part.
And how do you take it?
I had another one which is about appropriation also, which made me really angry. Which we were talking about activity, and I had one question, one reaction saying, but your buildings look very bland, you know, very uniform. They don't show any activity, which is true. And no, that's maybe why we did develop on the, it did remain in my head. I'm like, why are we supposed to represent activity? I mean, the activity is not enough. So that's why we try to work more on this idea during the Viennese Biennale on occupation. And I say, occupation activity is different. I mean, occupying a place is not the same as appropriating the place. I mean, picking a crowd somewhere, like in a stadium, is very different from sticking posters on the wall. You know, it's a different thing. You know, so we're not interested in appropriation. We're architects. You know, we're not going to appropriate our buildings. You know, so we leave it to. You know, we not have to fake it. On ecology, I would say. It's a huge subject. It's a big subject. Or, well, the way we put it, to make it simple, we say 50% of the energy that is put into the construction, that is consumed by a building, is 50% is construction. Huh? So the less you build, the less you consume. So, if you want to be clever, smart, do things well, then you do a building that can evolve in time and you don't have to knock it down and rebuild another one. So we've been working pretty much on this idea. That wasn't the subject here, but we've worked pretty much on this idea that the building can evolve and try to defunctionalize space. Usually you come with a very complex program, everything's defined, and we usually try to undefine it so the structure remains pretty much able to evolve in time and open to possibilities. How much we do it, I don't know. But I think it's a theme. It's something that we don't want to make plans that are too specific. I mean, they have to be specific to a condition, a place, but we're interested when they have a certain abstractness that allows you to wonder, is it office, housing, museum? I mean, the abstraction of the plan, which is also an aesthetic pleasure, is is a work for us. It's a way to deal with ecology somehow. There's another aspect, which I would say is using as little material as possible, which is good for us. We like skeletons and sort of skinny buildings. But the problem is that we are pretty much criticized on those two kinds of attitudes, because today ecology has nothing to do with ecology, I think. General discourse today is there's a deep contradiction today within ecology, because ecology is this 2,000 years of ecology in architecture. Huh? I mean, the terms, the idea. I would love to see, I did try in my school, but I didn't manage yet. But I would love to have a course of architecture and ecology. Like cover all the aspects, but not of today, not today's. The history of architecture through the point of view of ecology. The problem, I think, today is that has become sustainable development. Ecology has been reduced to the thickness of the wall and the size of the windows and the technological apparatus you put. The more you spend, the more matter you put in, the better. Is there something wrong? No? Something deeply wrong with how we deal with ecology today. I mean, the more you can, and it's called sustainable development. Development means, okay, it means it's good if you develop. And that's a deep contradiction that we have to deal with every day in our work. It's complicated, huh? The more material you put in, the more, for instance, today, we're discussing that, the more wood you put in, the better. But wood is carbon as well. Well, no, not in the calculation, it's negative. It's just to help, it's just, so ecology has become a means for consumption. If you want to be ecological, you have to consume as much as possible. And it's short time also. Photovoltaic panels, they last for maximum 15 years. So after 15 years, you have to throw them away. Come on, it's not long term, you see? So I think there's so many contradictions, and that's the point where we have difficulties to deal with in the current world. Trying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay, thank you, Ondřej, for this question. I think these topics we will discuss also the next week on the next lecture with collective material cultures.
Right.
It will be exactly about these things and topics Yes, we discussed it like before, but I just want to invite you for the next lecture, but I'm already quite done. So thank you for coming, and see you next week, and thank you for your lecture.
Thank you so much for also all the questions. They're really fair. Thank you.